What's going on, guys? Hope you're having a great day today. Pastor Marty back with another devotional video in the book of Mark. Today we're in Mark chapter 12, looking at verses 41 through 44. So, if you have a Bible, follow along with me. Mark 12, beginning at verse 41. Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were put and watched the crowd putting their money into the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor widow came and put in 2 very small copper coins worth only a few cents. Calling his disciples to him, Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more into the treasury than all the others. They all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on." All right, let's think about the context of what we're reading here. So this section of Mark, it focuses on Jesus' time in Jerusalem, which is full of clashes with his enemies. Back in chapter 11, Jesus cleared the temple of those who had turned it into a marketplace for profit. And in the last passage, Jesus spoke against the teachers of the law for 2 primary reasons. First, they lacked humility. They craved honor for themselves. And then Jesus said they devour widows' houses. They took advantage of poor widows, like the one in this story, and they led them to financial ruin by demanding that they give offerings that they couldn't afford to give. They placed unreasonable burdens on the poor because of their legalism. So now we get to this story, and Jesus sits in the temple that he recently cleared, and he watches people give their offerings. He sees many rich people giving large amounts and a poor widow who only gives 2 small coins, and it says it was worth only a few cents. Now, most people would think the rich gave more. Some people might even criticize this widow for not giving enough. They might say, how stingy, how cheap. But Jesus sees it differently. He calls the disciples to himself, and he turns this into a teaching moment. He says the poor widow gave more than all the others. Why? Because they gave out of their wealth, but she gave out of her poverty. She put in everything she had to live on. So now, what's the meaning of this story? How do we take this and bring it into our lives? Well, we have to be careful, first of all. This is descriptive, not prescriptive. In other words, it's an observation, not a command. Jesus didn't teach that all believers should give away everything they have and be poor. Think back to the previous passage about the teachers of the law devouring widows' houses. The idea there was that they demanded the poor give money they couldn't afford to give. We need to avoid this legalistic mindset that says we must give a certain amount or we must give everything we have and be poor. Having faith does not mean being reckless. Yes, God can repay everything that we give, but he also calls us to be wise managers of our money. So beware a mindset that says, I must give this number. I must give all I have. Actually, this passage teaches us that true generosity isn't about the amount that we give. It's about our hearts in giving. And this is just one example of an even bigger truth, that God looks at our hearts, not just our behavior. Now, how does this fit into the larger context of Mark? Well, a major theme in this section is the judgment that's coming on those who reject Jesus. We saw that illustrated by the cursing of the fig tree and the parable of the tenants. And we're going to see it again in the next passage. Jesus will come to judge the living and the dead. Well, this passage is a good reminder that Jesus doesn't judge the way the rest of the world judges. Jesus is not fooled by outward appearances. He looks at the heart. So now, how do we apply this to our lives? First of all, is your heart right with God? The only way to be right with God is to put your faith in Jesus. That means believing in him for forgiveness and repenting or turning from sin to follow him. So have you done that? Is your heart right with God? Secondly, this passage gives us a great illustration of heartfelt generosity. It's not about the amount, but it's about your love for God and your motive in giving. So how can you practice heartfelt generosity? What can you give? Think about your time, talents, and treasures. Are you practicing generosity? Take some time to pray about these things and respond to this scripture.